listen to Jane's LME Addiction, Cloud9 Fin podcast, where we talk about all things liability management. I'm your host, Jane Chomsky, head of LMEs here at 9fin, and with me today is Shubham Saharan and Tom Quinn, both reporters in our private credit group. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Jane.
So you recently, the two of you, published a story about law firm DQ provisions, and it seemed to send just waves and elicit very strong reactions from many market participants. I would love for one of you, maybe Tom, if you'd like to give me an overview of the story that you wrote.
Yeah, definitely. So on a source call about a month ago, a little over a month ago, we got a tip that said, that DQ lists are starting to target law firms, and there's this conversation in the market. And the specific reason was that there were anti-co-op provisions, basically. And so this was another way to get at them. So the lenders who were grouping together in the case of an LME were using certain law firms, and that this could stop law firms that are really good at creating those co-ops from participating in a future restructuring or a future LME or any sort of future engagement with the deal.
Interesting. And so, I mean, all of these stories obviously take a lot of tough reporting and are hard to cultivate. But it seemed like this one proposed challenges that don't often come in a lot of other reporting. Shubham, can you walk us through some of the conflicting information, the reactions you got when you were asking about these provisions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, it feels like reporting on these things is often like letting the genie out of the bottle. And so you have to really...
It's not real till it's reported.
Yeah. It's not real until it's reported. And no one wants to talk about it, and no one wants to let the genie out. And then once it's out, everyone wants to talk about it. So the amount of times I get on the phone now and I'm like, yeah, so these law firm DQ provisions, everyone's like, I have an opinion on it that I need to share. Where these people were a month ago when I was hitting the phones, trying to get them to talk to me. No one knows. They claim that it all went to their spam box, but we'll see how true that really is. So as it goes, a lot of these longer form stories that we end up writing, and a few more of these investigative trends, is as soon as we kind of hear about it, you just have to hit the phones. And the reactions to this one, and honestly how I knew that this was going to be a really interesting story to tell, is because there was such a myriad of different responses. We got responses just to be like, go pound sand. There is absolutely nothing that you're going to get from us here, and this is not true. This does not exist in the market. We had numerous people tell us that. And there were points where I think, we looked at each other and were like, are we going crazy? Has this actually not cleared the market? Is this just like a rumor? Are we falling susceptible to just noise and going to put this out? And then eventually we started hearing from sources who had seen it and had heard that it had actually cleared the market. And then from there, we just tried to get a critical mass. I mean, for the story, it was 7 people, though. If I'm being honest, I think we called close to 50 people in aggregate.
Probably somewhere around there.
So, and the folks that are cited in the story, we say that there's 7 individuals who were familiar with these terms. So that 50 that we managed to get on the phone with probably is a fraction of, the 100+ people that we ended up trying to call for this. Those additional folks were ones that were just reacting to, oh my God, I've never heard about this. And this is in some ways catastrophic. Others felt like this is a pretty natural evolution to the market dynamics that existed within the restructuring and LME world right now. And then others were just like, let's walk through the legalese and let's talk about how enforceable this is or isn't enforceable this is. And
so that's, I think, a really interesting point to bring us to sort of the next topic, which is that let's talk about the difference first between regular lender DQ lists and lawyer DQ lists or law firm DQ lists. And so, I mean, my understanding of these provisions is that, when a lender is DQ'd, it means that they are not supposed to be allowed to actually buy any of the debt, right? Whereas for law firm DQ provisions, and do either of you want to summarize the language that you ended up hearing is sort of like the iteration that actually passed the market?
So there's two different versions, and I want to clarify that there's two different versions that you can kind of attack law firm DQ provisions. And then Tom, maybe if you want to get into the language of it. So the first is one-time veto that a sponsor has written in where, whatever advisor you choose, you can just say a sponsor can elect to disqualify that one legal counsel, and then you can go find another one. And then the second way is to just literally have in the credit agreement a list of law firms that you cannot work with.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a short list is at least what our what our sources have been saying. And yeah, the enforcement mechanism has been just reimbursement of legal fees. So that's what we've seen so far, which is to say, should there be any sort of action after the origination of the credit agreement, the sponsor will normally pay the fees, like if it's a restructure, an LME, whatever it is. And so this is saying, you can't hire X firm and we can't totally force you to not hire them, but we can say we're not going to reimburse the fees, which can be a crazy amount of money. So that's a pretty effective way of stopping someone from hiring a counsel.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think what's so interesting also as this story is developing is that like the sponsors who typically, draft these language and are often proud of like aggressive provisions, here no one was willing to take accountability and say, I drafted this provision, I'm proud of this provision, I'm angry at how X law firm behaved, and this is the reaction. Like to this day, to the best of my knowledge, we don't know who the drafter is. Is that correct? Or do we know? We're not saying what's happening here.
Well, listeners, if you want the inside scoop, please contact either Tom or I. No. All jokes aside, I mean, from what we understand and the way that our process works is we don't put anything into writing until we're absolutely sure. And that means most of the time or not most of the time, all the time that it's been corroborated by multiple individuals. From what we've heard, there is a select few sponsors that have used this language and have, they have it within their credit provisions. And there are certain law firms that are looked upon a little bit less favorably by said sponsors. So that's, I think, as much as we can say on that one.
That's fair. And so, so let's also just dig into that for a second, right? Like, typically you think that when a law firm is like particularly aggressive and that's like a lender law firm is particularly aggressive, that most sponsor law firms would actually really like that because they are looking to make a deal at the cheapest. Like if you're a law firm that's saying I'm only taking 51% because that's what I'm seeing the credit doc says is what I need to amend, like you would think that a sponsor would welcome that. So it's not necessarily like, what is it specifically that would make a sponsor say, I'm so angry at this law firm that I never want to have to deal with them again, right? It's not just typical aggressive tactics against, it's not lender on lender violence, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to take a second and take a step back.
Or maybe it is.
Maybe it is. But I think the broader context, which I think is important when we consider your question is, what is the existing environment like for out-of-court restructuring, and what has the reaction been to co-op groups in recent months? So, I mean, not even recent months. I think in the past year, it's really become much more of a conversation. There's been a lot of anti-co-op language, as Tom alluded to, that's been, we've failed to see it actually clear the market because lenders are able to use whatever leverage they have to retain their right to organize, whether that's considered preemptive or, far too early and without reason by a sponsor or not. So I think this was primarily a reason to kind of backdoor your way into anti-co-op provision, to get at anti-co-op language or co-op provisions. Because, there are a select few law firms that are very, very good at organizing these groups. They tend to be very aggressive for their clients, and they can be hard to deal with. I think the other reason that we've also heard is there have been instances where sponsors have felt slighted because of, what they consider an outrageous bill, what they think is unreasonable terms, and they don't necessarily want to have the same counterparty negotiating with them in future negotiations.
Yeah.
Exactly. The only thing I would add, I think that every time we talk to a source, they say every deal is different, right? Like everything in this market is relationship based and all this stuff. And so, the normal follow-up question to that is, okay, so you don't like a lawyer or you don't like a law firm. Normally you would just call the other side and say, hey, this is a relationship. We want to keep doing deals together. I really don't like this law firm. Like, please don't hire them. And so the new thing here is that it's like in the language of the document to say it's beyond just the relationship. It's like the actual enforcement there.
Yeah, there's always a joke among bankruptcy lawyers that if you're debtor's counsel and you really don't like another law firm and they're like trying to become committee counsel, you go to the committee and you say, oh, I really love this law firm. You should hire them. And they're like, oh God, these are not. Whereas here, you don't have to play any sort of games. You're just like, I'm going to put it in my documents that they will not appear. But that brings us to an interesting point in just, taking a look at just taking a few steps back, which is people have the right to choose counsel, right? Whereas, in the market, you don't necessarily get to say, okay, or I guess in the form of DQ list, you do get the chance to say, you cannot buy up our debt. If you do, then you either one, we won't allow the transaction to close, or two, you won't be able to vote or you won't be able to talk with us. But can you really do that with law firms? Can you really say we don't want our counsel to talk to your counsel? What does that mean? What does that actually lead to? It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I think that, we've heard two kind of separate arguments to that. I think the first is to say that there's an ethics issue here. And I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyers would definitely be able to answer this better than me. But it's along the lines of when lawyers leave firms, they can take their clients with them, right? So you have the right to your counsel. And so if a lawyer moves from firm A to firm B and their client wants to move with them, they can. So, I think that that's the example that we've been hearing. There's kind of another argument, which maybe you can take, which is the sophisticated parties.
I feel like I'm in debate camp, and I've been assigned a side on this issue. But it's all right.
3 minutes.
I know. I have 3 minutes to make my argument. Look, there is definitely, we've heard the ethics argument come up. I think the other side of this is that these are two sophisticated parties that are entering into a negotiation. So a sponsor can put whatever language they want forward, but ultimately it's also up to the lender to sign off on it. And it's up to a lender to, this is a consensual relationship. And if you enter into a consensual agreement, then, everyone's a big boy and girl in this world, and you are knowingly signing away that right. So you can't necessarily, come at it with an ethics question post-mortem. I think the other point to make here is that it depends on which formulation you use, but there's not just one law firm out there. There's hundreds of law firms out there that kind of do the same thing, that have great restructuring and or now LME practices. And the one-time veto doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have counsel. It just means you can't have one specific counsel.
Right. So I guess my question for both of you, because you might have different opinions, and that's okay, is, I guess let's talk about specific iterations of language, right? If a document said you cannot have X law firm, do you think that is much more offensive than a veto version even if it has the same effect?
It depends on offensive to who, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The law firm or the lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? Is that something that makes you say, yikes, in a way that a different iteration might not?
Yeah, I mean, look, like there's two stances on this. I think there's like a more macro DCM conversation to have about what our lender is willing to concede right now, which is, I think, a conversation we should have. But the second one is like ultimately the negotiation of an LBO, a refinancing, a restructuring, what have you, is between a company and its lenders. It's not the law firms are just advisors here. So if the lenders and the sponsor and the company agree to certain terms, then I mean, the advisors, they're at will employees effectively.
Sure, but that's such a slippery slope argument, right? Like, what if every new loan doc said that lenders actually can't have counsel? They just have to appoint one, in the same way that there's a steerco. Whoever the head of that steerco is, they are just, they must argue out the terms and they have to draft up. Like,
Yeah, that's exactly kind of the conversation that I've been having recently too. And we've been having is, with people who are like, okay, fine, it's a relationship business. Like, you don't like this lawyer, like you DQ them. And, we respond and we say, well, lender DQ lists are starting to get a lot bigger than they used to be. So, once you start down this path, do you really know where it's going to end? And I think that that's kind of like another conversation that we've definitely been having.
Right. And that's what it is. Like, what if it's you make it just like a profits per year kind of thing, basically to knock out every like big law firm, that you can only have law firms that don't do this on the average day so that you have more leverage. Is that okay? I mean, we're dealing with sophisticated parties.
So let me throw a little wrench into this. And again, debate camp, my 3 minutes are not up on this side. And I think this has been put as a scenario to me that when it comes to negotiations between these two parties, lender counsel and lender advisors have to first engage with the company, right? Like, and this goes back to the enforcement part of it. The company can elect to engage or not engage with the advisor, even without these DQ provisions having been put in.
That's fair.
Do I agree that the enumeration of such is a different step than just this like kind of gray area of like, well, if we don't like you, then we're not going to pay your fees and we're not even going to talk to you? In those situations, like you kind of just have to go back to the drawing board and wait for the company to come back to you and say, yeah, we do want to engage in this. Or you have to choose another advisor. So I think, look, we can have the conversation about what does it mean to have this, again, enumerated in a credit doc, but I do want to put forward that this is not an unseen dynamic in the market.
Yes and no. I think that generally, right, like, yes, you can decide when and how you want to engage with your lenders, but if your lenders choose a representative, I understand that even if you're that you are paying for that representative, but you are still curtailing certain rights that they have to choose to have a lawyer represent them. It's okay if we want to agree to disagree. No, I
mean, hey, I've been given a side. I'm going to argue for my side. I don't know. I think it's a gray area issue, right? I, again, want to take the conversation to what I think is actually more concerning to me as I look at what's happening in debt markets, whether that's private credit, whether that's the broadly syndicated market, which is what are lenders willing to concede right now? And what does it mean that we have this immense amount of dry powder that needs to be deployed, that they're willing to go to such lengths as to include DQ law provisions in there? And, we say this in the story, and I think that this is becoming a bigger conversation and line of questioning that both Tom and I are quite keen on is what else are they willing to concede? We've reported on how event of default cures are becoming much more commonplace now than they were before. I mean, that's something that like you used to see like once every few years. If that, now there's a lot more cases of it where lenders are willing to just be like, yeah, we'll let it slide, I guess. Lenders are willing to call protection is starting to wane now. They're willing to just give up their 101, 102 call depending on who the sponsor or the lender, or not the lender, who the sponsor is or what the company is, just to retain certain assets on their balance sheet. So I think that's the question is, what is this immense pressure on lenders at this moment that they're willing to accept such egregious terms? Because I agree with you, they are pretty egregious terms.
So I guess that's a good closing question, which is, do we think that these are actually effective ways for sponsors to really gain leverage in these negotiations by DQing a certain law firm or just giving themselves veto right? Or do we think that anti-co-op language or something along the lines of, or just some other provision is probably a more effective and possibly more ethical way to go about this?
Yeah, I literally spoke with a source yesterday who was like, listen, it's hard to build the co-op. You have to be good at it. It's relatively like new, but we're talking about really smart people in New York City and they'll figure it out, right? Like, it's not like it's going to be impossible for a firm that, might not be on our minds right now to figure out how to do this as well. And it kind of makes the whole thing go away. So I think to your point, the responses that we've been getting are, okay, this is kind of interesting and we'll see what happens, but I'm not sure it's the most effective way to stop the co-ops.
And I mean, let's be very clear. These are law firm DQ provisions. They're not lawyer DQ provisions. Like, you could, if your lawyer moves, it's not like a sponsor and your sponsors use their one-time veto right. It's on them.
And I think in the same way that, all these funds have figured out ways around the DQ list by like not really holding the debt, even though they technically are the beneficial owner of said debt. Like if one lawyer at a firm decides to consult for another firm in exchange for for a profit sharing agreement, is that DQ'd? Not really, right? Like, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that the same way people are coming up with these creative solutions to harm, there are also creative solutions to get around.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's the fun part of covering this market, is figuring out what the loopholes are to get around the loophole.
Yes, exactly. So that's that. I'll bring you guys back to figure out the loophole beyond the loophole beyond the loophole.
Oh, God, yeah.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Thank you guys again for coming. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen.
And if you have any comments or questions, please reach out to podcast@9fin.com. Thanks again for listening.